Hey y'all, it's Jenny here. I want to start off by saying I'm in absolute awe of how much love and support y'all have given this recipe the last couple of weeks. Across all of my platforms, I think 50 million of you have viewed it. So I'm going to slow this recipe down and walk y'all through it step by step and answer a lot of the most commonly asked questions I got. First rule is your kitchen, your rules. You can modify this recipe however you see fit. I'm just showing you how we like to eat it. There's absolutely no reason you should be adding ingredients to your food that nobody in your house is going to eat. So I will discuss some substitutes for some of the ingredients in this soup. So let's get started, and I hope y'all love this recipe as much as me and my family love it. So I always start by heating up my Dutch oven or my pot, whatever I'm using that particular night to make the soup. Then I'm going to brown whatever meat I'm using. We always use 2 pounds of Italian sausage. But if you don't eat pork or you don't like sausage, feel free to use ground beef, ground chicken, ground turkey. Just know that if you don't use the Italian sausage, you're going to need to add some seasoning. Which brings me to my number one asked question. Jenny, where is the seasoning in this soup? And easily put, it's in the Italian sausage. Italian sausage is far different than breakfast sausage. It has a ton of flavor and a little bit of a kick too. When we pair the Italian sausage with a whole onion, some garlic, and some rotel, this soup really doesn't need any more seasoning for my family. If you are the type that needs more seasoning, please feel free to add it. And if you're going to forego the Italian sausage and do ground beef or ground turkey, I would suggest adding a couple of teaspoons of salt, some pepper, some Italian seasoning, probably some garlic powder and onion powder, maybe even a little bit of thyme. But again, that's just what I would add if I wasn't using the Italian sausage. You add what you like. So while my meat is starting to brown, I chopped up a whole yellow onion and throw it in. I let it cook with the meat and kind of soak up some of that flavor. And I usually just take my spoon or my spatula and make sure I'm breaking up that meat into smaller chunks. Which brings me to my next most frequently asked question. Why do you hold your spoons like that? And the answer is, I don't know. That's just how I hold my spoons. I'm telling y'all, I was not prepared for a lot of these questions. But we're going to let that meat and onion continue to cook, and then I'm going to peel about 4 to 6 cloves of garlic. I've learned if you take the back of a spoon and kind of press it into the garlic, it makes the peel come off a lot easier and makes this job go by a lot faster and smoother. If you don't have fresh garlic, I would use probably 2 tablespoons of the minced garlic, which is just fancy terminology for garlic in a jar. I'm also not above throwing in a couple of squirts of garlic paste if you are on a time crunch. Which brings me to the most hateful comments I got on this recipe. A lot of people were upset that a lot of the ingredients for the soup came out of packaging and were concerned about the sodium content, the fat content, the calories. And listen, I get it and I respect it, but I also need y'all to understand this is something you eat in moderation. Although my family would love to eat this on a weekly basis, we simply do not. This is usually something I cook after a bunch of 12-hour night shifts when I'm exhausted and need something quick and semi-good on the table. But now that my meat is brown, I'm going to add in a block of cream cheese, which is 8 ounces of cream cheese. I add this in with my meat before I add any liquid because I find that it melts down so much easier and you don't have clumps floating around in the liquid that never melted down. This was a hack I learned several years ago, and it has been one of the most life-changing hacks because I get so frustrated with cream cheese, especially when it doesn't melt down in the liquid recipe I'm cooking. So what I do is just cut off chunks from the cream cheese, plop it in with the meat, allow it to kind of heat up and start to melt, and then I take my spatula and mix it in with the meat, and the roughness of that meat kind of helps to spread it out and get it evenly within the pot. And I know that was a bunch of word salad, but I was trying to make it make sense. Now I'm going to mince up those garlic cloves and throw those in as well. Again, I used roughly 4 to 6 cloves, but I would not be above using 10 cloves of garlic. If you followed me for any length of time, you know I am a huge garlic fan and will probably put way more than what the recipe calls for every time. Also, if you are using any other meat like ground beef or ground turkey, I would probably throw those seasonings in while the meat was browning or right here. But again, your kitchen, your rules. I'm just telling you what I would do. Typically when I'm using seasoning, I like for them to cook into the meat as well, especially if you're using chicken or turkey or a meat that doesn't have a lot of flavor. And what you see me doing here is just kind of evenly distributing all of that cream cheese. It cooked long enough to get soft and made it to where I was easily able to mix it in with the meat. Mix until you see no more clumps of cream cheese, because once we start adding the liquid, that cream cheese is probably going to stop melting altogether. But this is what mine looks like once that cream cheese is well incorporated with the meat. Next, I'm going to pour in 32 ounces of chicken broth. Another question I got asked a lot was, why chicken broth? And the most honest answer is preference. If you don't like the chicken broth, feel free to use vegetable broth or beef broth, bone broth, water if you want to. I don't think that would taste very good, but it is an option. But I typically don't use beef broth unless I'm using actual beef or I'm doing some sort of rice. I like beef broth and rice. But unless I'm doing like a French onion soup or like a taco soup, I'm not a huge fan of beef broth in soup. But now that we've got that settled, we are going to add a can of Rotel to this soup. A lot of people had mentioned that Rotel is kind of too spicy for them, so I do say if that is too spicy, just use some roasted tomatoes or chop up a fresh tomato. That would be really good too. And there's always the option of leaving the tomato out altogether. Now I am going to put a little bit of black pepper in here, but again, that is the only seasoning you are going to see me put in this soup. We are going to bring this soup up to a boil, and then I'm going to add cheese tortellini. And I typically use about 16 ounces of tortellini. Now, if you are not a huge fan of tortellini, I've had several people comment saying that they substituted the tortellini for diced potatoes. I have personally not tried that in this soup. However, I don't think that it would be bad. There are also many different types of tortellini, or you could forego the tortellini altogether and use a whole different type of pasta. That is what I love about cooking so much. You can customize just about any recipe to what fits your family the best. We're going to cook that tortellini until it is soft and tender, and then we're going to add some baby spinach. This is a 16-ounce tub, and I ended up using about half of this tub. My son absolutely loves the spinach in this soup, and he requests that I add more and more every time I cook it. Another question I got quite frequently was, can I substitute the spinach for kale? And yes, you can absolutely substitute the spinach for kale. The kale has a slightly more bitter taste, but I do enjoy it in a soup, and that bitter kind of cooks out. Now, as far as cooking this spinach down, sometimes I throw the spinach in, mix it in with a spatula, and then immediately remove it from the heat. And then sometimes I cook it until it's an absolute sloppy, soggy mess. It really just depends on what we're in the mood for and what else is going on in the kitchen at that exact moment. And some of you were absolutely disgusted with that, and that is okay. You don't have to eat it. The best advice I have for you with the spinach is cook it until it meets your standards. And y'all, I promise I'm not trying to be mean or have an attitude, but I think sometimes people forget when they see a recipe online that they don't have to follow it completely to a T. We are not all going to have the same taste buds, we are not all going to like the same thing, and that is okay. You shouldn't be cooking your dinners to appease me, just like I don't need to cook my dinners to appease strangers on the internet. It would be so wasteful for me to put a bunch of ingredients in this soup that we don't like just for us to not eat it. So please, please, please customize this recipe to your liking. Oh, and another thing, sometimes I do have to throw in a little more broth once the tortellini finishes cooking. Sometimes I'll add a dash of heavy cream or a can of tomato sauce. I truly cook this soup differently probably every time I make it, just solely dependent on what items I have on hand. But my favorite thing to do is to top it off with some shredded Parmesan cheese. The Parmesan gives it an extra dash of flavor, and I don't think you could ever have too much cheese in a recipe. Although I'm quite certain many of you will probably disagree with that, and that's okay. But that about sums up my sausage and tortellini soup recipe. If you have any more questions or suggestions, just drop them in the comments. I promise I do love hearing how you like to eat your soup or what modifications you made for your family, because it may just be a modification I want to make to my soup, something my family might enjoy. But again, I'm so thankful for all the love and comments y'all have made on this recipe across all my platforms. Across all 4 or 5 platforms, I think I've had close to 50 million views, and I'm in awe. And quite frankly, I really don't even believe it. But as always, happy cooking, and let me know if y'all have any questions.